Welcome back to another episode of Glasp Talk. Today, we are excited to have Raphael Hyde with us. So, Raphael is a product design leader with 14 years of experience bringing innovative products to market. And he's currently serving as staff product designer at Snowflake and was previously the head of design at MotherDuck, where he was the first hire. And before that, Raphael spent nearly 5 years at Google and as a design lead and Web3 community lead, working on major products like BigQuery. And he's also a limited partner at PlanB Ventures, investing in early stage tech startups. What makes Raphael's journey unique is his diverse background, from founding companies to being a design fellow at Carnegie Mellon University and IDEO Collab. So today, we'd like to explore his insights on product design in data-driven companies and his approach to building products that serve hundreds of thousands of users globally. Thank you for joining APL today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So first of all, I saw your LinkedIn and you started working at Snowflake as a staff product designer. And I was really curious. I'm really curious. Why did you join and what happens? And yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when on the tail end of my MotherDuck experience, I was, I think deciding where to go next in your career after, 15 years or so, I started to, I guess, prioritize more of the the larger thesis of each company. And so I was talking to a tremendous amount of companies, founders, and I guess just like people I respected in the industry. And I really wanted to be on a team where there was really strong founder fit or leadership fit. And I think a lot of times you're not able to prioritize that depending on where you are in your career. And so for me, that meant I want to be part of an organization where, as a very passionate like designer builder, I'm empowered. Whether that's like I have autonomy or I have access to the right sort of resources if I need to build out like a design team, or I need to partner with other major stakeholders in the business, whether they're in product or engineering or marketing or sales, growth, etc. And each organization is going to have a different maturity level. Maybe those teams don't exist. And so I felt that at this point in my career, I wanted to be a part of a team that had a lot of potential for scale and growth, like organizationally, but then in the design function. And I think a lot of tech companies oftentimes look at the design department as like a second-class citizen, and they're not given the proper funding or support or negotiation control during prioritization or road mapping. And after talking to a bunch of different companies, Snowflake really actually stood out to me because their design leadership came from very mature past, companies and teams. So their actions spoke for themselves. And then as I spoke to the other leaders in the business, it seemed like design was actually very empowered as it carries out its responsibilities. And then, of course, I think Snowflake being, the largest IPO in history and where we're positioned with the kind of AI race, and then I think the ergonomics and the semantics of working with data, I think they're actually positioned very well to capture a much larger global market for data practitioners, citizen data scientists, and I think just companies that are learning how important data analytics are going to be for them to evolve to that next level. So I think it's going to unlock potential for every kind of company, regardless of what sector you're in. So I think as an industry, and then as from a maturity standpoint and a leadership standpoint, it seemed like a no-brainer. And now after being on the inside, I feel more than happy with my choice.
Wow, amazing. And I remember at Snowflake, the leadership changed about like half a year ago or so, from the previous, co-founder to like a CEO, new CEO, like a CEO. And do you think that leadership change change the internal culture? I know you just joined, but change the culture or how they respond to AI or responsibilities in the space.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't have a before and after perspective, but I have been asking that question. And I actually knew Sridhar from when he was founding Niva, the Web3 company, the adless browser that he was building before it got acquired by Snowflake. So I actually met him and he asked if I could join his company, ironically. And he discovered me through this like Web3 podcast that I was producing at Google, and it had some notoriety. So it's interesting my path of like I knew him before when he was building this company, and then he was brought into Snowflake. So it kind of feels like we both took a little bit of a full circle together. So I couldn't say if the culture has changed just from a leadership shift, but I do think, anytime you have a company that's founder led and it goes through the enormous growing pain of IPOing, and then of course becoming the state of the art analytics platform in the world, and then all of a sudden that guy leaves, and then the new leader is at the helm. So these are big shoes to fill, and I would be remiss if I didn't admit that there is probably an enormous culture shift that a lot of people are still figuring out how to navigate. And I think it'll probably take me a couple months to figure out exactly what is working and what's not working, and maybe like where opportunities lie. But I think he's, well equipped. He's got a strong data background. And I know, having run the ads business at Google for, gosh, almost a decade, I would say he's got the experience to do the job. And I guess it's just a matter of him maybe giving people like myself the right amount of runway and support so that we can empower him. Because I think end of the day, it's the people that he brings in that are going to really help execute on the results of his plan. So fingers crossed. I'm going to be optimistic.
Yes. And and also another question is I'm curious always about is like, you're now staff product designer, right? So designer has several seniorities like junior, middle, senior, and staff. And I don't know, some company has principal product designer, right? So I'm curious, what's your current responsibility? What do you design the real product? Or I mean, as seniority goes up, the more people focus on like branding, messaging. I don't know. I'm curious how the responsibility change and yeah, over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people are always wondering, as you evolve up, what are your responsibilities and what are you not doing? So I guess I'll have to answer this with a bit of a caveat, because I have somewhat of an idea what I'll be doing at Snowflake, but I think I can answer that question more largely in the industry, because oftentimes staff designers are kind of defined the same within most of your Fortune 500s. And then I think that definition slightly changes depending of the maturity and the scope of your work at your company. And so I'd say a company like Snowflake that, north of $50 billion market cap, companies of the same sort of pedigree, staff designers are usually responsible for pushing the vision of the company. So that's like, what is the mapping of the industry? What are the chess pieces and how our competitors are positioning themselves with the opportunities of emerging technologies, emerging markets, maybe emerging customers, and points of friction? So how can I work with my leaders in PM and engineering and figure out what sort of path we should take, whether it's like new product development, shoring up features within our existing products or suites or services, and figuring out how those can build a moat around our market or new lines of revenue so that we can continue to scale. And so, obviously, if you're a smaller company, let's say you're like a startup, Series A, Series B, maybe your valuation is between like 200 million and 600 million. Or if you're an AI company, a bajillion dollars, your responsibility is probably striking on product market fit. And so you're executing a lot of tactical responsibilities on a daily basis. It could be like doing actual in the pixel feature work. You're designing the product or particular features, and then you're probably trying to review it with your stakeholders and ensure that it's resonating with your customers' needs. and then providing the same sort of validation and, whether it's through releases, like measuring engagement through releases, or maintaining quality as those features reach production. And so I think it's kind of a long answer, but like the size of each company will determine the responsibilities for staff. But usually at large scale mature companies, it's like trying to influence direction of the business and then probably enforcing a high level of quality and craft amongst the design department. And then whatever sort of like strategic or, tactical daily to-dos that they need help with.
I see. So I think you started, your career as a designer. So what made you think, I want to become a designer. So what made you interest in design?
Totally. So this is a good story. When I was really little, I'll start it this way. So my dad, he was a builder. He would build homes. And as a small child, I was kind of, in his shadow, learning how to do construction, whether it was electrical or plumbing, framing, foundation work, finishing work. And that really inspired me to work with my hands. So I actually started my career in industrial design. And I felt that industrial design was the strongest conduit between me being able to have fun and like create things. And I didn't actually know that this field existed. I was introduced through meeting David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, at a design excellence banquet. Blew me away. I was like, oh my God, you can like make products and as a job, like that's a real thing. So changed my major. This was I was a freshman in college, and immediately went into industrial design, and that was like sketching and doing, human-centered research, and it really captured my attention. And so that is when I went out to Silicon Valley and wanted to like build startups, and had a crazy experience doing that. But during that, I realized there was this huge spike in, the internet, and how like data-driven design and software was kind of eating the world, from, Mark Andreessen's words. So I kind of had this premonition that if you want to be the best designer, you need to understand the physical and the digital and pair them together. And that is when you can cross both paradigms, understanding how humans interact with physical space and digital space. And so then I jumped into software, and the goal was long down the road, I'm going to pair them back together and I'm going to be able to do it all. That was my wishful thinking as a young designer. And so I've stayed on the digital design path for, gosh, I think most of those 15 years. And I think that's where I'll stay. But that's essentially kind of where that journey started. And then I started bouncing around at all sorts of companies, consultancies, and here we are.
And from your background, I saw, your career started like in 2006. And it seems like you have seen the iPhone when iPhone came out, right? It's like a physical, like a beautiful product, I think, at the time. And so does that change your how to say, the motivation to as a designer at the time?
100%, because the iPhone, we'll just say the iPhone, but I think like devices like the iPhone, they became the first contact point for us to consume kind of like notifications. We'll use that for an example. And it starts to train our minds to think a different way. There's all this subconscious interaction that we're doing on our devices, and the iPhone introduced that into every element of our life. And so that meant new business models were going to be born around how can you leverage social media, how can you leverage analytics, tracking user data, and how that can be built into the business models of digital products today, and the whole, SaaS offerings, et cetera. And so I think seeing the world before that, I mean, this is kind of more of like a humanitarian perspective, but there was much less, mental health problems. People were able to kind of separate in the sense of like church and state. There is like my life without the phone and then my life with the phone. But now it has it has completely swallowed the world and how people interact with everything. So it certainly influences my perspective and approach to design a lot.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really great invention. And yeah, I totally agree with what you said. Yes. And then you said you met Kevin Kelly, right? The founder of IDEO. You met or you saw him?
Yeah, David Kelly. So he was at a design excellence dinner that I actually went to when I was an undergrad, and I got to meet him briefly there, like very briefly. And he was introducing well, not introducing, but talking about his like the 10 archetypes of design and how you can use them to illustrate narratives and understand human-centered design methodologies. And so that's when I met him.
But later you joined, IDEO collab, right? It's
Mhm.
also part of IDEO, right? And yeah, that's
Mhm.
interesting. Yeah, like a coincidence. Oh, is that a coincidence, or did you apply, or did you? Oh,
So
what
that
happened?
was
Yeah.
when I learned about, since I learned about IDEO and product design at the same time, I looked into it and I was like, oh, I didn't know how special IDEO was. And so I kind of make a personal goal to myself that like, I'm gonna work there one day. And then I just like worked really, really hard. And then eventually I had the chance to be in the collab for a little while. So that was certainly kind of like a life milestone, because I never thought that was even possible. And then, being in the office alongside all these amazing thinkers and designers and innovators, it really was like a life-changing moment for me.
And what exactly, yeah, what actually did you do at IDEO, so as a design fellow, like exploring new ideas or like researching, so development something? What did you do?
Yeah, so the IDEO
Mm.
Collab has a fascinating business model, and I think now it's evolved into like a different kind of organization. But when I was a fellow there, we had a IP membership model with corporations. So the goal was, let's do a bunch of future thinking design and research 3 to 5 years out. And if we discover something novel, we'll share that IP with paying corporate members. And those more corporate members could be like, Fortune 500 banks, or like Ford Motor Company, or big insurance companies. And they're incentivized by trying to stay ahead of the curve. And so if you're a financial institution in 2017, you really wanted to know, is crypto something I should be investing in? Or if you're like an automotive company, should I be investing in IoT technology? Is there something within these emerging technologies rather, that are going to be really important to defending our business? And so myself, along with a bunch of other fellows, our responsibility was to basically sit down and experiment and explore some of these really emerging technologies, build prototypes, conduct research, and kind of like really put a lot of thought into these kind of generational hypotheses. So I'll explain one. If one of the projects that we were working on, could you leverage a network of electric vehicles to be used as a place to store energy to offset carbon emissions on the grid?
Mm.
And if you could reduce the use of coal power plants, meaning that when coal power plants produce power, that electricity, if it's not used, you lose it because there's not a large enough storage capacity for it. So it was like, could we build an arbitrage electrical marketplace? So if you own an EV, you can charge your car when you're at work, when the cost of power is actually low. And then when you go home at night and power consumption peaks, you could sell it back to the grid at a profit.
Mhm.
And if you could do this at scale, you could tremendously reduce the amount of power that coal power plants would need to produce. And that problem is very complex. You got to figure out, what are the incentives of EV owners? What are the incentives of the car manufacturers? What are the incentives of the charging networks? And of course, what are the limitations? And then what kind of technology do we need to build so we can actually predict how much available capacity is in these cars on any given day, so we can determine the market price for that power. So it's like you're a market maker, you're a capacity management system, and then you're also kind of a liaison for all the different municipalities and stakeholders that are involved. That's one example, but there are many others, but like kind of a crazy idea. But if you were to do it right, you'd save the environment, you're providing a line of revenue for EV owners, and of course, you're providing a major assistance to the municipality and an incentive for the automotive makers to build their cars to do this better. So
Interesting. And did that product become like, did that project realize? So like
So
EV power charge, yeah.
yeah, so since we were like a research lab, we would do the research and figure out like if it is possible, which we felt that it was. And then we would just give that research off to the, basically the members. And so Ford Motor Company, for example, they got access to our discoveries, and so did like Duke Energy, Exelon Energy, and then like the city of San Francisco. So it was like a shared effort. And then we didn't really have a vested interest into like executing on the solution, because you would need enormous investment and resources from one of these companies. So what they did with those discoveries, I'm not too sure, but everyone seemed very interested that we were doing that work.
I see.
Yeah. And regarding those ideas and also experience, since you have both like a enterprise experience, designers experience, and also consumer, consumer and design experience. And I'm curious, when you think about enterprise software or consumer software, or not only software but product, physical product, and is approach to the solution different, or your as a designer mindsets are different? And I'm really curious, for those use cases. Oh, of course, there are many use cases, but for both, do you use different?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, because I find that usually if you're designing an enterprise solution, it could be almost like a utility or a commodity for your customer. So for example, let's say you're designing enterprise data warehousing software. And so a lot of these companies, they're kind of looking at it as like, this is a commodity that I need to have to support my business operating, which is so much different than maybe like a consumer product. Like, I want to design the best way for you to find a place to stay, like Airbnb. And so those consumer experiences oftentimes are, they kind of have to hit a certain level of quality and delight and ease, because your users, they might not be experts. Your consumer could be a middle school student, while if you're building enterprise solutions, it might need to be so robust and so efficient that it could cost millions of dollars. And so the incentives for your customers, and then of course being able to stand out amongst your competitors, are vastly different. And I think those will contribute to your design requirements so differently. Because if the customer requirement for an enterprise tool is like, it has to cost this much and it has to be this fast, maybe it doesn't have to be that easy to use. I think in a perfect world, like, we would like enterprise tools to be easier to use, but your customer is probably an expert, and they probably use it maybe every day. Now I would call that like a toothbrush action. Do it every day. So it's like you really, really, really get good at it. But are you using every single consumer app that you use every day? Maybe you are. And it's like, then it's more of a building in gamification and addictive UX patterns into those products. Or like, at least people don't say that, but that's how essentially most growth driven design is formatted. So there are, yeah, completely different set of incentives and like design approaches that you would take for those, for consumer versus enterprise.
I see. Interesting. And as you mentioned, based on, which company or which product you work for, is you're, how to say, as a designer, you are constantly getting like inspirations from many experiences, right? I assume, and that's what I believe great designers do. And but for which product you work for, is your process of getting inspiration different? And also I'm curious, which is harder and for you?
Oh,
Sorry.
which is harder, consumer
Yeah,
versus enterprise?
yeah, and how to get inspiration for each case in your case.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. So I'll answer the inspiration one first. I find that the pendulum swings so much in the design industry because like the zeitgeist is going to define trends, styles, color palettes, um, like different behaviors, ways you will engage your user. And so, for example, being born in a generation where I didn't have a phone till I was like probably 16, I wasn't building up those habits from a very young age. And so the things that might inspire your users are going to be correlated to like when they started to use certain devices. Or like they're going to have a standard of quality that they may expect. And so if you're building, so if I'm looking for inspiration for like a consumer product, like what are the sorts of styles that are going to resonate with a user that could be very young? Maybe it needs to be a louder brand or a very passionate design language. Maybe it needs to have a lot of color, imagery, video, like the types of things that are going to be more palatable to a younger generation, because those are the kinds of experiences that are being fed to them all day long. And I have to be able to compete, basically, to get their attention or to allow them to see the value add to their life, depending on what the experience is. If we're talking about an enterprise tool, I'll give you an example. Maybe you're building a really comprehensive analytics tool, and your users are data scientists, right? They've went to school for 8 years and they know how to do very high levels of math, and they're trying to like find a needle in a haystack to answer a critical business question. And so these people are so well versed in the types of tools, and I would say like the ergonomics of a like data analytics workspace. And so you got to be able to empower that person, like give them superpowers, which is a whole different type of strategy. And so to be inspired, to find inspiration to like highly leverage that kind of user, the inspiration is totally different because it's more about being very productive in that environment versus being entertained. And so if I'm trying to like design for a really young user, then I might go look for inspiration in pop culture. I might go try to figure out, what are the kinds of very sticky and palatable uh, artifacts that they're seeing in the music industry, in gaming, versus like if it's a more enterprise related tool, it's like, what are the kinds of experiences that really leverage flexibility in a tool, ease, maybe stuff that has to deal with like reducing the amount of distractions. And so the inspiration is going to come from very different kinds of places. But me personally, I usually look across like all different kinds of domains because I think you can cross-reference points of inspiration. So like right now, I'm thinking that a lot of data practitioner tools are starting to introduce, a lot of LLMs and AI. And so there's this conversational, medium that we're trying to introduce. And those conversational mediums are arising in all sorts of things. Like maybe it could be in gaming, maybe it could be in how we administer certain healthcare services to people or support services. So there's a pretty wide spectrum. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it answers a lot, yeah, to my question. And also you tapped into AI, the interesting topic. Nowadays people use AI for not only writing something, but also coding, also, like designing. And so some people say, yeah, first of all, has AI changed how you work, how designers work? And secondly, some people say, about the AI safety, some people say, oh, super optimistic. Oh, let's go more, let's go for, or, but some people say, oh, we should stop, So yeah, could you answer this question? Like how it
Yeah.
changed? Yeah, safety.
So I so I'll try to be brief about the first one. So how AI has changed how I work. I'm very curious, and so I kind of experiment with all the AI tools I can get my hands on. So whether it's like different ML notebooks, or what Claude is doing, what ChatGPT is doing, what Gemini is doing, and try to see how like that can be incorporated into my work. So whether it's like summarizing text or helping me even just like think through basic problems. But it's more of a more efficient Google search for me. I haven't found that very many LLMs have been a part of my daily design process. And I think the challenge there is usually it depends on the kind of product you're working on, but I'm usually working on very, very specific micro interactions within a very particular data workspace. And these types of problems are so laser focused that AI tools usually don't have the same sort of intuit to understand how a human might make mistakes as they navigate a digital workspace. It might help me brainstorm on different problems or ways that a user might navigate that, but it really kind of comes down to, can I design an experience, and can I like almost synthesize the different ways a user might use it? If the question was, give me 100 different ways that I could sort menus, it's going to go look through the internet and find me a bunch of old news and ways I could do that. And maybe it'll help me, it'll help stimulate some thinking around that. But oftentimes it's really like when the pen hits the paper, or the mouse hits the pixels, and you're kind of like painting a canvas of ideas. And so I think I guess the designer to AI heuristics of being able to help supplement some of the creativity behind my process, that is a much harder gap or chasm to cross. So it hasn't become as big a part of that, but I think it certainly will make a huge impact in how PMs define requirements, provide evidence and supplemental research for their findings, or at least the priorities that need to be set. And of course, like a lot of engineering work, being able to produce more efficient code or consolidate functions. And then I think also helping designers really leverage their design process through code. So I think that's certainly an area. And your second question was, I forgot your second question.
Safety, yeah, because AI impacted. If AI impacted, how about your job security? For some people, and some people are concerned about AI. So yeah.
Yeah. So about a year ago, and I think like COVID certainly influenced this, because I think the way we'll be telling this story in a couple of years was like during COVID, we hit this kind of economic boom, and a bunch of Fortune 500 tech companies like mooned to the sky and their stocks went up. And then all of a sudden we saw this pullback in the economy, and there was a tremendous amount of layoffs. And if you look at the trajectory of hiring across all the different roles, design largely did not change. And so Carta publishes data around like how startups are hiring and spending across different verticals. And there are some management consultancies like Boston Forrester that produce different hiring data on this. But at least what I saw was, I think a lot of companies started thinking they could replace designers with AI. And so there was a huge pullback on hiring for design. Companies like Google and Amazon, I felt, were trying to hire lower level designers to do more of the player coach, more on maybe even on the management side work, but not fairly compensating them for it. And so I think what that means was there was a lot of assumption that AI could be able to consolidate the needed skills to do the job. And after about a year, I felt like then that reversed. And I talked to a lot of design leaders in the industry, and it seems to be a pattern that emerging technologies come in, there's an attempt of consolidation across the cost of resourcing within your business, and then you start to see it affecting your bottom line and not being able to execute properly. And so whether it's like those that are managing budgets or headcount, I think they started to pivot back to like, we really need the proper design leaders. So I say all that to answer your question, because I actually think AI certainly is going to be a major threat to a lot of knowledge workers, especially people that are like processing information and then converting it to useful artifacts, whether it's like I'm a PM and I define requirements based on market research to drive change in my organization, or I'm a designer that's interpreting customer needs and then manifesting a design solution, a digital solution that we can eventually build into the product. And I think there are many steps throughout all these different roles that will eventually be consolidated and probably replaced in some capacity. But being able to work as a team, I think that piece, that is going to be much harder to replace. So if I were to be honest, I don't feel very bullish about the future of young designers in their career, because the skill set is going to dramatically shift. And I think those that have very strong domain expertise, along with those like tactical design skills, will be successful. But it's really hard to develop that skill set without having a lot of years of experience. So we're in this very painful chicken egg situation, and I'm kind of nervous about it.
I see. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, many people talking about AI, and people usually talk about positive things, positive side of AI. So yeah, we need to like keep looking into it and how to adapt to it. So yeah, you mentioned that like, yeah, product leaders, I mean, just curious, like, what is a trait of great designers? So do you have any yeah, things in mind? So good designers trait or characteristic or potentials or skill set experience. So
Yeah. So, and I'll speak to this through the lens of like digital product designers. I find that really effective digital product designers are ones that can prototype and that are willing to take really critical feedback and iterate quickly on the product. And so, and it's a little different skill set. It's kind of like removing any sort of personal sensitivities, because if the goal is to make the business successful, which is like what pays for you to have a job, then you should always prioritize making the thing better versus like, maybe I get offended because the feedback hurt my feelings. And that's tough, because like you want to build an organization that celebrates trust and empowers people to do the best work they can with the necessary resources. But you don't want to overspend, you don't want to waste time. And so I find that really it just comes down to designers that have figured out a way to quickly communicate their ideas visually, and then being able to iterate on that quickly. I mean, it's so simple, but I find this to be such a hard thing. So I'll give you another good example. I started my career where we drew everything. Everything was design sketching. And then you would be able to sit in a room with your teammates and design through ideas, and then being able to have a very articulate conversation around like what's good and bad. And you could quickly reach consensus. And I think that's really what all these companies are trying to do. They're trying to take a ton of knowledge with people that are navigating an ambiguous landscape, being able to take those ideas, manifest them in a way where we can build alignment, and then we can move one step forward. You're not going to get it perfect the first time. So if you can at least perform that operation effectively, then you're always moving forwards. And I think designers are often, they're the participants that are they're the connective conduit that helps people take their ideas and then manifest them into the world. And so if you can develop any sort of skills, whether it's like drawing, workshopping, prototyping, so you can manifest those ideas and quickly find alignment amongst the people you're working with, you are inevitably creating value within the business. And then you sprinkle on domain expertise and being able to figure out, like, suss out what's good and what's bad and what's actually possible to build before versus like what's impossible. And that's really important too. But hopefully your team is comprised of other domain experts and they can weigh in on that. And so I think if every designer was able to do those things a little bit better, they would absolutely be adding a tremendous amount of value to their business.
Yeah, I agree. And when do how do you find those great traits when you are hiring designers? Do you have any like tips or like designer hiring flow to find those great designers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one way is like, let's co-design together. And a common exercise in interviews is like the whiteboarding exercise. I'm going to give you a design prompt and I'm going to say, design the best alarm clock in the world. And you're going to go crazy and you're going to start communicating your ideas, asking about any limiting questions. What are some of the constraints that, I have to operate within? Who's my customer? And if you can at least like kind of walk me through the order of operations of how you think and how you communicate your ideas, are you going to do it manually with like pen and paper or through like Figma, other design tools? Then it helps me kind of see your process. And are you a team player? How do you take criticism? How do you take, maybe crazy constraints like we don't know and like figure it out? And I think that's really how you kind of see people perform under pressure. And then hopefully they're also kind of introducing really novel things around like, I designed this because it might allow us to build the business in this way. And that's going to allow us to carve out a new line of revenue. And then we can do experimentation and blah, blah, blah. So that's one thing. And I think another is like, how do they storytell? Like if your job is to build alignment and evangelize an idea within a team or a company, you have to be a really good storyteller. How can you
Okay,
capture your audience and like inspire them to kind of go in a specific direction? And if you can, I mean, that's a very valuable skill. And I think a lot of people, I think designers oftentimes can be introverted. And I think that's fine, but oftentimes good storytellers need to be extroverted. Are you comfortable speaking to a large group of people and having conviction, but also an open mind to change? And I think then you can do that through other kinds of like storytelling, testing, mechanisms.
Interesting.
I see.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly curious about, the first hire designer at the company, because you were the first hire at MotherDuck, right? So, and since we are, team of like a developers, and we don't have designer, we are looking for designer. And then how can we find the first designer? And also what the designers looking for the company? I mean, if they are the first hire, what is the best case, and how can we improve this process?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. How do you find the needle in the haystack? You're perfect for them, they're perfect for you. It's like dating. So I guess it's hard, but I think it probably just comes down to, do you guys have a very compelling story that's going to gravitate to somebody with a certain set of creative skills? And so if your objective is to build a particular product in a particular industry, then, I mean, and I don't know exactly what you guys are doing, but like, let's speak in hypotheticals here. Some designers might be attracted to the idea that they get to put their stamp on something. They get to own how this product is going to evolve, maybe visually or through its like user experience patterns. And so if you find that's important to you, kind of evangelize that, through your job description or your network and how you're kind of advertising for this new hire. And I think there are designers with all different kinds of strengths. But I think one thing that I keep in mind is, excuse me, I want to hire or work with people that also see a future in what we're doing. And so, is there a broader sense of purpose or mission that they might gravitate to? And if that is not palatable, then like, are you really building the right kind of company that people are going to want to invest their time in and their future and grow with you? Because you're going to spend a ton of time and money to maybe bring them on and foster them up. And so, like, I guess thinking of in the zeitgeist, there are probably notable elements that people are flocking towards. A lot of people want to work in AI because there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of promise because that industry is going to grow tremendously. And so, are there important attributes in the work that you're doing that are aligning with the zeitgeist and that are going to give a future and opportunity to somebody who maybe has a different set of values, but you got to figure out kind of where that crossover is. And I think without knowing the specifics of the scenario you're working under, it's kind of hard to prescribe something, but I'd say that's generally an approach that I would take.
And how about this situation? Like, let's say one candidate is really passionate and resonate with our mission, but a lack of skill. But one has a really great skill, but they don't resonate with our product, but they are okay, working with. Which one should not we, but the startups or the company looking first hire, first designer should take?
Yeah, you're describing me like 15 years ago. I had no
Okay.
skill and a lot of passion. So I think, I mean, it probably depends on the company and where you can, what you can afford. Because I am a firm believer that if you can find somebody who's highly motivated and passionate, you can teach them those skills. But do you have the time? Like, is there someone on your team that's going to mentor that kind of person? So I think as a first designer in a startup, they often need to be someone who's pretty seasoned. You don't have to hold their hand. They're going to know how to navigate ambiguity, build and maintain design resources, inform you of the gaps that are needed for like design, engineering, and product to be successful together. And so I think oftentimes startups are kind of trying to find the unicorn that's willing to work for like no money. And so unless you can find somebody who's, very, very motivated and not very financially motivated, then maybe you can lock in that unicorn. But I often find that the first hire at a startup it really needs to be somebody who they're gonna have to, you're gonna probably have to compensate them at the market rate or provide some sort of equity package that will hopefully grow into something meaningful, because they're gonna have to come in with the right set of skills to not cost you in other ways of like lacking domain expertise or industry knowledge, or even maybe like connections in the industry that can help you guys leverage your network for sales or distribution. If it's a startup, I feel like those people have to be kind of a jack of all trades and already be maybe personally invested in the problem that you're solving, so that they see a future that also starts to give them warm fuzzies when they do the work.
Yeah, thanks. And so going back to like, storytelling question, like, storytelling part. So how do you like, find out if like, candidate is a great storyteller or not? So in like in the design interview process or hiring process at Snowflake, so does Snowflake provide a story with candidates so that they can tell the Snowflake story, or like, designers has to have like, their own story and tell it so to you? So how to like, do you give like story or like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Usually the formal interview process, and this is kind of the same across most companies, is you'll have a panel presentation. And
Okay.
you're going to present to a team of peers at the company, and usually it's the team you're going to be on. Maybe it has some designers on it, some product managers, and engineering, and whoever else they want to attend. And you get to present a case study or two on your own work. And that is a
Yeah,
perfect
okay.
forum for them to see how well do they articulate why they were the best person for this job and the work mattered to the business? And if they can convince you of that 30 minutes to an hour, then they probably did a good job telling a story. Because usually that's kind of what it's manifested from. Like I was dropped into this business problem. I was able to figure out that with design, we can enable certain outcomes for our customers that build such strong consensus that they're willing to pay for this product. And that resulted in revenue, engagement, usage, growth, expansion of the business. And I think that's kind of the story that every company wants from their designers, because that is how they're going to be working in the business. Usually every designer, their skill set is going to vary. Some are not going to be the storytelling type, but maybe they're amazing at doing like really fine tactical work. And that's good too. And, that's very important depending on what problems you're trying to solve. And so I find that presentation is kind of the best way to suss that out.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
And sorry, it's a little bit over, but since time is
No
running out,
problem.
we wanna ask you. So since our audience are like aspiring founders, product managers, designers, and writers, newsletter writers, researchers. So I wanna ask you the advice and to, let's say, aspiring designers, people who wanna go for designers as a career, and what kind of advice would you give them?
Totally. So ironically, this is the same advice I would probably give to just most people, because I think it separates the good from the great. Do hard things. Do lots of hard things and build up thick skin. Because if you're starting out in your design career, or you're in the middle of it, or you're at the end of it, it's not going to be easy. And you got to be able to overcome all sorts of challenges, whether it's people problems, learning a new technology, navigating an ever-changing industry. And that's only going to become easier if you can do hard things. And so I don't want to tell people what those hard things should be, but like find ways to challenge yourself and put yourself out of your comfort zone. Public speak. I don't know, go learn stand-up. Go learn a new sport. Go learn a new programming language. And struggle. And struggle every day. And when you're done struggling, struggle some more. And you're gonna become so damn good at your job, because you're not gonna be afraid of being confronted with the ambiguity or adversity. And you're not going to sweat the little things, because you're going to know that maybe I woke up at 5 o'clock every day and I busted my ass in the gym. And that was the hardest part of my day. So I can actually go into work and I can work on the computer. And it was a lot easier than doing 100 pull-ups. Or maybe it's like I need to go like running in the woods when it's freezing out and I'm soaking wet. Thank God I get to go to work because it's warm in there. Or like I'm learning this super complicated programming language and it's very frustrating. I have no clue, but at least I get to go do some creative work now. So it's like more like life advice, but I find that in every discipline, the thing that most people struggle with is, things are hard, and you just need to kind of like confront that in the face and just take it on. And maybe one other thing actually that I would add to that is like figure out like what your driving purpose is. Like why are you doing this? Are you motivated by money? Are you motivated by like wanting to build cool technology? Do you want to be a part of a certain company that has a larger purpose in life? Whatever that thing is, and figure that out and really like put a lot of pressure on that and meet some of the best people in the world that are doing that thing and convince them to mentor you. And I think once you find somebody who can really kind of kick you in the butt and tell you like what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, that's going to help tremendously. I think doing hard things and finding the best people to push you, if you're willing to give back to them because you don't want to waste their time. I think if you just keep doing that, you will undoubtedly become very good at your job, especially if you're coming up in the design industry today.
That's a great advice. Like getting out of comfort zone and also being surrounded by great people, best people. Because you were the average of 5 people you're surrounded by, or something like that, and that's amazing. So yeah, and this is last question. And by the way, so since Glasp is a platform where people can share what they are reading, learning as their digital legacy, and also this project, since you mentioned purpose and driving force, internal driving force, and since I had a subdural hematoma when I was 20, and so left side of my body was paralyzed, and I was almost dead. So, but I wanted to leave something for other people while I'm alive, so that I could feel a sense of contribution to humanity, society, others. So since then, I've been thinking about how I can leave something for other people while I'm learning or studying. So that's how we got an idea of Glasp, and that's why we are working on Glasp. It's like a huge mission to democratize access to other people's learning before they pass away, or even after they pass away. We can still, others can access it, and could be a good way to circulate knowledge. And so then I'd like to ask you, what legacy or impact do you want to leave behind for future generations?
Yeah. By the way, I love that. I love the mission and your story. That's incredible. So thank God you're able to overcome that. And that's what an incredible reason to do something of purpose. So thanks for sharing that. So ironically, my motivation actually stems from when I was younger. My older brother, he got very sick, and then he became a quadrilateral amputee. And so from that experience, it basically taught me that like life is not fair. And if he can overcome the most outrageous trauma and challenges, and then now be able to like live a whole life and do all these things, like I have no reason to have any excuses. So that's kind of what's built up this like thick skin mentality that I've been like evangelizing. And so I think the way I want to be remembered is that, have a very strong set of like a strong code of ethics to do the right thing, and ensure that that is at the bedrock of like all the work that you do. And so I'm very morally driven. Like I think it's very important to build an ethical business. I think using manipulation and like sabotage through technology, it bothers me that a lot of companies are, use data mining and trying to kind of get inside of our minds, whether through social media or other kinds of manipulative micro interactions, and they're leveraging that to make billions of dollars. And I think it's just on so many levels, I just think it's wrong. And so I think having a strong set of ethics to drive the work that you do is really important. Because I think that also they'll be a good example for up and coming designers and creators in the industry, that you can also do good work that is for good. I know it is not possible for everybody, and a lot of people are not gonna be able to get that job. And so there are stepping stones. So I guess it's more so that I would love to be remembered that I was able to make a meaningful impact in the technology industry through high quality design patterns that push the industry forward to a very high standard that allowed us to have very wholesome and impactful user experiences that didn't manipulate users for profit. And how that manifests is going to be super different within every company. But I think that's something that I have cared about for a long time, from when I first became a designer. And it's something I will continue to try to kind of execute on as I grow in my career.
Thank you for the beautiful answer, and thank you. Yes. And yeah, thank you for joining and sharing your story and experience and insights with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, this is fun. I rarely get to talk about these topics, so it's nice to ask myself like, oh, this is why I'm here. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.